Mainly clear tonight, a low of 43, northwest winds 10 to 20. Back to mostly sunny tomorrow, high of 64, southwest winds 10 to 15, and partly cloudy on Tuesday with a high of 68 for Wednesday. Isolated thunderstorms are possible at a high of 68. Keeping you informed, News Talk 1090 WKBZ, the talk of Muskegon.
The talk of Muskegon. News Talk 1090 WKBZ.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. And today my guest is George Moss. George is a retired educator, currently a lecturer at U of M, and the host of a podcast program, What's Going On, which can be heard on Monday afternoons from 2 to 3 on flinttalkradio.com. George, welcome to the Renegade River Show.
Okay, and thank you for having me, Mike. I think we're going to have a nice discussion this afternoon.
I think so. We've got three segments, George, and I've broken this gigantic topic into three parts. I hope, but I want to get the listeners kind of queued up as to what we're doing. This is based on a premises that says to save America, we must first save inner cities, and to save inner cities, we must first save family. And you know what? In an exchange with George Moss and a mutual friend of ours, I ended up with a 3-page list of some fascinating statistics about the results of single parenthood, and just a pretty nice conversation with George over a period of time. And so it made sense to try to share that with the listeners. George, welcome to the conversation.
Okay.
Tell me this: before we get going, though, what I'm just curious about a few things. What do you lecture on at U of M?
Well, I taught, first of all, 39 years in the public school system in the Beecher School District, and during that time, I taught at 3 different universities on a part-time basis in the evenings, and then after I retired from the district in 2005, I went down to the University of Michigan Flint, where I'm now working in the Africana Studies Department.
Okay, very nice. Now, I'm curious, how do you see the difference between high school teaching and college?
Well, every level of education is a weeding out process. In the 9th grade, you see it in terms of the increasing dropout rate from 9 to 12. And on the college level, there's another screening process that takes place in terms of those who have the credentials go to the next level. And, of course, as the population matures, you start getting a more mature population, more focused, and more academically directed. So you don't have, I was 3 years principal, my last 3 years in the public school setting, having taught in the classroom 36 years. And on the college level, what you see, of course, is a more focused population that is more career-oriented and does not bring some of the things that come with youth.
Yeah,
and that is just
not so much shenanigans and goof-offs then.
Not too much on the college level because I think that at that point, and we look at our own backgrounds and we can say the same thing about our own lives, and that is you go back and you can see that you're now looking toward what career you're going to have. Parents, I left my own home at 17 years of age, and my mom made it very clear that it was on me now. She had put me through high school. I finished 1 year earlier than my group that I was in first grade with. I was promoted, double promoted in the 4th grade, so I finished at 17, and at that point my mom made it very clear it was time for me to go out there on my own. You didn't have Obamacare where you could stay at the house till you're 26 years old. And so we didn't have these little trinkets that they give us now. You had to be personally responsible, and at that point, I never stayed at home after 17. I went off to college at 17, and I worked during the summer, and so I never really moved back in my household that I was born into after I was 17 years old. I've been on my own for more years than I care to remember.
You know what's scary though is, and it really goes to the point you're making, is that when you look back at and I left when I was 18. I looked like I was shot out of a cannon when I left home. But what surprises me, and I've talked about this on the air before, is that nowadays when we're looking at 26 or 27. I mean, it wasn't that far ago in America's history where people that age group were colonels and generals in the military and doctors and lawyers and all kinds of other things, and now they're staying at home watching cartoons, and it's kind of a
yes.
But the other thing
I'm
is,
a historian, and I will tell you this, Mike. When I go back and look at ancient history, one of the persons I cover in my class is Tutankhamun, who is a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty in Egypt. And he was pharaoh of that country when he was about 18 years old, running a government. Of course, he was a regent, and there were surrogates that were around him. But basically, at 18, we're talking about 26 years old. You're still at your home. 18, he's actually running the government of Egypt, ancient Egypt. So, and you see that generally throughout history, where those who were in their youth, in their early 20s, were out shaking up the world and doing things that would be shocking today, given the dependency that we see that is not only going on in the country but being encouraged by the politicians.
No question about it. And so when I look to people that were caused to be mature, for lack of better words, well, like your mother, sounds like she clearly took great care of you, but made you grow up to be a responsible citizen. But it makes me wonder what tomorrow's generations will be when we've allowed them to become, mushrooms sitting on the couch watching TV. It's very scary for what's coming, George.
It is very scary, and part of it has to do with not ever facing consequences of bad choices that you make. You probably can remember when we were coming up, we heard the adults saying certain things, these truisms that they were saying that made us more responsible. For example, one of the things I kept hearing in my household is that you made that bed, now you lay in it. And, I got tired of getting kicked by my own shoes. And so I started making better decisions because all the pain I was bringing into my own life, I was suffering the consequences of it. And then I had a mom. I was in a one parent household, but I had a tremendous mom, and my mom was one of those persons that was like the enforcer. I said in an article I wrote on Facebook recently that she was from that extension cord side of parenting. And, of course, it sometimes was shoe or it was anything else she could throw. And by her having policies that were in place, and they were in place whether we liked it or not, sometimes we didn't understand some of the things she was doing is typical of youth. We never understand our parents because we don't have the experiential understandings that they have based upon the longevity of their lives compared to the short-range experiences that we have. And so we can't understand our parents. What I did, though, was to take a page out of her book. My mom kept telling me, if you think I'm wrong, and I always thought she was wrong, she said, if you think I'm wrong, then you live long enough. Well, I tell you what happens in our adulthood, and that is we do live long enough, and we finally realize what Mark Twain said. He said that when I was coming up, this is Samuel Clemens, when I was coming up, I had the most ignorant father in the world when I was 14 years old. He said, it's really amazing what my father learned in 7 years. So when he became 21 years old, his father wasn't quite so dumb after all. And that's what we found out about our parents. But what those parents did was they held us in place until we could get it on our own. And that's what my mom did. My mom was not taking into prisons in the household. And although I could not fully appreciate her discipline at that age, I did live long enough to understand what she was doing. And I'm very appreciative of that fact that she saw for me when I couldn't see for myself. And the end result of that has been that I'm now sitting behind a desk, and I understand why I'm sitting behind that desk. My mother willed me to that position, so I have my password into my computer through my mom's name, and we have to change it every 90 days. So then what I end up doing is I find some other way to spell her name. Maybe sometimes I have to spell it backwards because you have to change your password every 90 days.
Sure.
But I try to find some way in which, before I even start my job, before I can open my computer up, I pay homage to my mom for having guided me when I could not guide myself, because I didn't have the understanding. And that will never change, by the way. If you will go back and read what they said about youth in ancient times, it reads like a news report that came out of the paper yesterday. In other words, what we say about youth right now is what they said about youth back in ancient times as well, and that will never change because youth are basically uninformed. They don't have experiences, and they basically are immoral because they don't really have the information they need to process to make the best possible decisions. That's never going to go away.
Right.
And that's why you have to have parents who are standing over the youth, who in fact understand it in their name, so that until they can get it later for themselves, the parents have to be the eyes, ears, and the decision makers that will allow the children to have a chance to get it at a later date.
Tell me this, George. When I look at the statistics that our friend Terrence shared with us, and it's specifically about single motherhood and the results, at least statistically, of the youth in America over the last few generations. When I read those statistics, your mother, your family, at least the product that is you, are in defiance of all of these percentages. I mean, I read down the list, and 63% of youth suicides come from single mothers. 70% of teen pregnancies came from someone who came from a single mother. In all of these across the board, you're in defiance of them. So, what was the difference for you, George?
I think that the norms. There's a proverb that says that it takes a village to raise a child. My dad was absent, and I have a lot of stories I can tell about that and how that played out. But what was happening in that community was also formative, and I remember going, we had a little creek between what we call one community, and when we go into that community, we say we're going across a branch, because that would be where that little water stream was. You had to cross over to go to the other community. And what I would notice is that when I would go out of my own neighborhood into another neighborhood, not so far away, but in another part of the neighborhood, and the rules were the same around that corner, across that stream, there was in my own neighborhood, in my household. And the point is that because the values were so similar, that you had rules in your house and you had rules next door and across the waterway, you really were being guided by other parents, other adults in the neighborhood. In other words, what would happen is that if you got out of control across that branch, then there was a phone call in your household. And so the normative things that were going on in the community were correctives of that which was abnormal. My dad was absent. But that does not mean that there were adults who were absent in my life, because there were others that were in fact playing the role of the surrogate parents in absentia. And that is the role that has to be played by adults, because the adults will not, your parents will not always be around. The question then becomes, what are the other adults in the neighborhood doing, so that when the parents' eyes and ears are not on the scene, what are the other eyes and ears that are available to, in fact, act as guides in the neighborhood? And that role cannot be carried out only by parents. It has to be the adults in the neighborhood who are the guides that are looking out for the well-being of the children. Because
George,
wherever they are, you need to have some supervisory role being played by the adults.
Right. Now, George, are you saying that's what's absent now, that the community, the sense of community and the sense of involvement of adults in general is absent, whereas when you were growing up, there was a community there? Is that what you're painting the difference?
Yes, I'm saying, yes, I am saying that, and I would say, in addition to that, we have gotten this idea that the children should be licensed. Our parents were the parents that thought that children should be seen and not heard. It does not mean that children had no voice. It means that in the decision-making that went on, that was an adult's role.
Right.
See, there's so many things have changed. When you look back at those homes, they operated in a way in which there were certain kinds of parameters put in place in those homes. Let's look at just one aspect of that. In the household where I was, we didn't have the material wherewithal to heat all the rooms. In other words, in fact, we didn't even have the the heat that you have. I have a heater in my basement, my furnace, and it heats the whole house. Well, we had one floor, and we had a single heater that was in one of the rooms. You close off all the other doors to other parts of the house, and the entire family was in this one room where the heater was. Now, in that room, there were the adults. It might be some elderly visitor coming over, maybe an auntie. Your mom is sitting there, and where they're sitting is right in front of that stove, in front of that fire, that heater. Where the adults are is central in that room. Where are the children sitting? Well, there's a bed in that room, and we're sitting over there on that bed, 4 of us on that bed, and we are quiet while the adults are sitting there in discourse with each other. But by being quiet around adults, we are learning some things unbeknownst to ourselves, unconsciously learning some things about how the roles are played when adults are in the environment. No one is actually talking about it, but because you're in the room where this is played out in a non-discursive narrative where they're just talking to each other. But what you're doing is that you're in that room quiet and you are hearing the adults talk. You're learning to be patient and quiet in that household. And when you go out of that house into that school, there are adults in the school also. And that same kind of authoritarian base is there, but it starts out in that room in the household where you are able to carry that out of that room into the classroom.
I'll tell you this, George. Reflecting back while you're describing that, some of my fondest memories were sitting there in silence listening to my father and his brother, my uncle, talk. My vocabulary was increasing. My knowledge of the world that was before me and then in my time was increased. What we need to do, though, George, I've got to take us to a break.
Okay.
When we come back, though, just to get your juices flowing, I'm wanting, you'd mentioned something to me in a different conversation. You talked about the two Americas. Mm-hmm. When we come back, I'd like to have you tell me what that means.
Okay.
Listeners, we'll be right back.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake.
There's a Nobel Prize for peace and, stuff like that. But they ought to have a Nobel Prize for awesomeness, and the winner would be iHeartRadio. iHeartRadio lets you listen to 1,500 live radio stations, and it lets you create custom stations right on your smartphone or tablet. Download it for free at iHeartRadio.com. The Nobel Prize for awesomeness goes to iHeartRadio. That's right. You better recognize.
So many of us are involved in a business where we're always working. Getting completely caught up seems impossible, but it's not, because I use GoToMyPC from Citrix, and you should too. With GoToMyPC, I can be at work from anywhere. I can use any program, edit and send any file, just as if I'm sitting right at my desk. But here's the secret. Sometimes I'm not. With GoToMyPC, I can be at the airport, a restaurant, or even at home. Because I'm using GoToMyPC not only on my laptop, but also on my mobile phone, my iPad, virtually any mobile device. GoToMyPC is freedom. Plus, it's super easy to use, and it sets up in minutes. And I want you to try it for yourself. No risk. Try GoToMyPC free today with a special 45-day free trial just for my listeners. Visit GoToMyPC.com, click on the Try It Free button, and use the promo code KIM. Then download the free app to your mobile device. That's GoToMyPC.com, try it free, promo code KIM.
Hi everyone, Jay Farner here with Quicken Loans. Today's mortgage rates are just about the lowest that we've ever experienced. But because these super low rates fluctuate, Quicken Loans has a great new way for you to find out what the current mortgage rate is for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage right this instant. Just pick up your mobile phone and text the word RATES to AMAZE. Text RATES to 26293 to see the latest mortgage rate on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Again, simply text RATES to AMAZE. That's RATES to 26293. At Quicken Loans, we always provide you with the latest technology designed to give you an amazing mortgage experience. Maybe that's why for 3 years in a row now, J.D. Power & Associates has ranked Quicken Loans highest in the nation in customer satisfaction for primary mortgage origination. Again, text rates to amaze 26293 and discover for yourself why Quicken Loans is engineered to amaze.
Standard text messaging rates apply. For J.D. Power and Associates award information, visit jdpower.com. Equal housing lender. Licensed in all 50 states. NMLS number 3030.
Countryside Greenhouse of Allendale, in their new location, 3 miles west of Allendale, has begun their annual clearance sale with unbelievable savings throughout the entire greenhouse. Shop for great deals, featuring all hanging baskets at least 50% off, all patio planters at least 50% off, and much, much more. Check us out online for more information, hours, and directions. Hurry out while supplies last and save on thousands of items from Countryside Greenhouse of Allendale, where you'll always find the highest quality at the lowest possible price.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
News Talk 1090 is the talk of Muskegon.
Well, welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. And with us today is George Moss. George is a retired educator, currently a lecturer at the University of Michigan Flint, and host of his own podcast program titled What's Going On. George, welcome back.
Okay, thank you again, Mike.
Hey, when we went to break, I'd asked you to tell me a little bit now that we're back about the two Americas.
Well, I would come out of the, I would base my conversation on the two Americas out of a book written by a sociologist in New York called Andrew Hacker, who has a book out. I think it came out in the 1970s called Two Nations, Separate, Unequal, Separate, Hostile, and Unequal. And in that book, Andrew Hacker talks about basically Black America and White America, and the two Americas will be on different sides of the racial. We're on different sides of the racial divide. We are in a sense, two nations that are separate from each other and kept separate from each other by the politicals and the race hustles, as I call them, that want to maintain that divide for their own political interests and to their own personal benefit. We have a misunderstanding of a lot of the racial history of this country, and I think that discourse that we get into as a result of that confusion about our history has caused us to get engaged in things that are not going to bring about the kind of healing that must go on if we're going to repair some of the things that are damaging this country. That is to say that if we are going to have a future as great as what we've had in the past, if we're going to continue that legacy, we've got to do some healing of certain rifts that have occurred in the fabric of American life that can be cured if we have the right understanding of what it is we're dealing with. And there are pundits, Mike, who want to keep that lack of understanding from developing because the rift benefits certain groups, certain individuals, certain politicians, and certain political, groups, political parties, and this type of thing. So we have to go back and look at the history in order to get the history straight, so that we can begin to understand what needs to be done right now. Part of what I say about the racial narrative is that the country has never been as profoundly racist as we claim that it is. We have to understand that when you talk about the things that were happening in the South, for example, the jury segregation, where you had signs up that were requiring certain groups to do certain things, that sit in certain places, use certain water fountains, go to certain toilets, can't go to certain public facilities. Those signs are up, but why are they up? They're up because they're enforcing behavior that otherwise would not have been normative. In other words, if the people are as racist in the South as they say that they were, then why do you need to have laws that force people to do what they are inclined to do anyway because of the racial perch in which they in fact set their behavior upon? In other words, there's no need for laws if in fact people are going to be practicing racist kinds of conduct in the absence of those laws. In fact, I would say this: the very presence of those laws is an indication of the absence of the generalizable racism that has been applied into the Southern culture. Now that being said, we have to also say then, going back to the Civil Rights Movement, that we always attribute all the changes to it beginning to overturn racism, et cetera, and black folks were able to therefore advance because of moving whites off the rights of blacks. That is a profound misunderstanding that we have had as a result of the civil rights movement that did some very good work, but it did not do that work. The fact of the matter is that even under the vestiges of racism in the South and other parts of the country, although it's not quite as insidious in other parts of the country as it was in the South, blacks had, in fact, decided to go forward despite what was, in fact, given to them as the odds of their success in that regard. My dog just came in here. You're going to have to get out of here. I don't know why Gwen let you out.
George, I thought somebody was clapping.
In the room here. Okay, I think we're back here.
Okay. I thought you had your own audience for a minute.
Yeah, I've got to. I have this boxer here in the room now. I hope he doesn't start barking. Don't want to interfere with the conversation. But in the absence of the civil rights movement, quite frankly, blacks were making more progress between 1940 and 1960. Before there was the advent of the movement headed by Dr. King. We know Dr. King gotten started in '55, but the civil rights movement really took off in 1963 with the March on Washington, where King gave his vision for the country. The I Have a Dream speech we all knew about, that King gave on August 28, 1963. But before that, quite frankly, back in the 40s, black people had planted a foundation for the kinds of advances we saw in the 1960s. And if the truth be told, blacks were in fact gaining at a higher rate, accelerating rate, before the civil rights movement kicked in. And the reason for that would be that having laid a foundation of going forward through education and other means, that you would see the results of that in the next generation. And so we see a tremendous spirit in black people advancing, which they gave the credit to the civil rights movement, when it really was the kinds of things that blacks had done in the face of segregation, refusing to stop and go and refusing not to go forward, to not be turned around. And we see the results of that. And so if you look at the statistics, you see that blacks were advancing at a faster rate before the Civil Rights Acts were passed in 1964 and 1965, and there was a deceleration of the advancement in the aftermath of those laws being passed. Now, why would that be the case?
See, George, let me interrupt you for just a moment.
Okay.
My understanding of it has been, and certainly please tell me if I'm wrong, but when I look at the statistics that I've been able to dig up, and I follow the black community from the end of the Civil War through about 1960 or 1955, it appears that almost every year that both economically and educationally, their educational results in both cases, those lines were going up on the graph, not down or not plateaued. And then they came to a stop. And now you're talking about civil rights, and maybe this is a two-track rail we've got going here, but to me it went to the war on poverty, which I saw as a war against liberty. To me it was a way of placing a large group of people into financial bondage. And I'll go you a step further. From my view, the people that did that to secure votes and nothing more. And when they found out how successful it was, they moved beyond the black community to all of America, which is what we're reeling from now.
Mike, you have a great understanding of what took place. When you have all of the indicators that the advancement is upon you, Bull Connor's not going to do it, who was the police commissioner in Birmingham. It is clear that George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, is not going to do it on behalf of the black community, and it's not going to happen in Ross Barnett's Mississippi, nor Orville Farber's in Arkansas. That's just not going to happen. And what it does then, it makes it clear that anything that is going to happen is going to come from the self-determining levels of involvement by the group itself. In other words, that you have to save yourself. Now, what we have today is another type of mindset that's been created, and it's been created by the very things you were talking about in terms of those who stand to benefit by making non-reality reality and creating a fantasy in the place of reality, by making it appear that people had no role to play in their own edification in this country. No government is going to do, and this is what Clarence Thomas is saying in his book, by the way, who is on the Supreme Court. And if you mention his name in the community, the black community, you're going to get almost an assault. But I do mention his name because I understand. I read his rulings. I know what they're saying about Clarence Thomas is incorrect, based upon the kinds of things he's writing as a member of the Supreme Court. The confusion there is that Clarence Thomas, by the way, is one of the persons that's holding on to the ideal of the civil rights movement, and the movement has been abandoned by so-called civil rights leaders today.
Yeah,
that's what the conflict is.
Let me just interject talking about Clarence Thomas. When I read Clarence Thomas's writings or when I listen to him speak, it to me it's reminiscent of reading the writings or reading the text of speeches from black community leaders from back in the 40s and before that, meaning he's truly a strong voice for the advancement of the black community, and of course they want to paint him as something different because he's not sticking with the progressive line, but he's, to me, his voice is the exact type of voice that led that year after year acceleration of educational results and income results up into the Great War on Freedom.
Yes, and you mentioned earlier the war on poverty, the things that were done during the Johnson administration. That is a lot of where the problems are right now. That is that the liberal and progressive agenda was introduced into the urban centers, where it made it appear that the work that the blacks had been forced to do for themselves, based upon the fact that there was this unequivocal behavior on the part of political leaders, they were not going to do it in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and these other places. So blacks had to do things for themselves, and it was very clear based upon the kinds of restrictions that were placed upon their citizenship. Now, in this post-1960s period, with Johnson's anti-poverty programs and things of that sort, things that blacks had done for themselves, now the government is making it appear that is where the solution is going to be actually rendered. And there was surrendering of many self-determining kinds of roles that blacks had played for themselves. And in the aftermath of that, opportunists came in, and for 40 years we've had this misleadership that has in fact led them down the wrong pathway. What Clarence Thomas is doing is holding on to the vision that was in place that blacks once advocated, and now they're advocating something very different. I'll even give you an example of that. In Gerard Taylor's book that is called Paid with Good Intentions, he talks about a conversation that went on the Supreme Court with the highly revered Thurgood Marshall, who was the first black on the Supreme Court, was appointed by Johnson in 1967. And there's a conversation going on with Thurgood Marshall in the Supreme Court and Justice Douglas, who was another liberal on the court. And the justice is asking Thurgood Marshall to side with him in terms of the ruling on affirmative action. And he says to Thurgood Marshall that you came here before the court in the Brown versus Board of Education case, and you argue that race should not be a consideration in determining public policy. Thurgood Marshall answered and said to William O. Douglas, he said that you whites have been discriminating against blacks for all these years, and now it is black folks' turn. And at that moment, Thurgood Marshall, with any high moral ground that he had, he surrendered it in that conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, now what Clarence Thomas is doing is holding on to the civil rights vision that has been extrapolated out of existence by the so-called civil rights leadership today. And so there's been a overturning of the apple cart, so to speak, so that those that were once vested in having a colorblind society changed their mind as we got to the precipice of to the door of where that room was housed. And when they got to that door, they changed their mind because they recognized that if that in fact had occurred, then there'd be no work for this rights organization to do. So he changed their mind, but Clarence Thomas did not change his mind, and that's why he's vilified right now, and really feared, because if the information gets out in the public domain of how there's been this misunderstanding of that racial past in the more recent part of our history, then those who are now looked at as heroic figures like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton will be vilified, and those who are now vilified, such as Clarence Thomas, Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, John McWhorter, Shelby Steele. In other words, the conservative voice that black people themselves once spoke in would become the heroic members of the community as they once were.
No question about it. No question about that. You know, let me. One of the things I'm still kind of needling on. Wade Horn, in his article, "Why There Is No Substitute for Parents," he wrote that after controlling for single motherhood, the difference between black and white crime rates disappeared. And I want to insert that in the part of what you're talking about, George, because when I look back at the war on poverty, as it were, and all of that general loggerjam of progressive policy making, to me it all seemed to be an exact attack on the black family. And so when I look at the stats, I say, I don't think this happened by accident. But George, we need to go to a break, and so if you would hold those thoughts, and we'll be right back, everybody.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Kim, my computer crashed. I lost all my files, and I can't get them back. I get calls like that every weekend and emails every single day. Don't let that happen to you. Back up your computer files at home and at work with Carbonite. With Carbonite, your files are backed up automatically and continually in the cloud, away from danger, away from your next computer disaster. And then, after disaster strikes, it's easy to restore your backed up files. Plus, with Carbonite, you can access your backed up files on any computer or on your smartphone or iPad with a free Carbonite app. Computer disasters happen all the time. That's why for home and for your small business, you need a better backup plan. You need the backup plan I use. It's Carbonite. Plans start at just $59 a year. Start your free trial today at Carbonite.com. No credit card required. Use offer code KIM, and you get 2 bonus months if you decide to buy. That's Carbonite.com, and the offer code for 2 bonus months is KIM.
If you're overwhelmed by debt and thinking about going to a credit counseling company for help, think again, because the majority of those companies actually work for the credit card companies. And they make the credit card companies a lot of money from people just like you. But there's another way out of debt, and it's not bankruptcy. A way to reduce your debts and save you thousands of dollars. Even better, you can find out how for free by calling 1-800-513-8622. At Freedom Debt Relief, we're not a credit counseling organization. We're not a debt consolidation company. We offer a unique alternative to save you the most money possible to resolve your debt in the shortest amount of time. If you're thinking about a credit counselor, ask yourself this: are they working for you or the credit card companies? Reduce your debts and save thousands of dollars by learning the secrets to settling your debt. For free information, call 1-800-513-8622. That's 1-800-513-8622. 1-800-513-8622.
Fox News Radio, I'm Karen McHugh. Many in Oklahoma are taking stock of their possessions, both great and small, as they clean up from Friday's tornadoes.
Residents of Union City, Oklahoma, sift through the debris that once was their homes. Yvonne Merritt found a few mementos, but after losing her entire house, she says she has her husband and son, and those are the important things.
Fox's Mike Tobin in Union City, Oklahoma. Authorities say 7 of the 9 who died were killed in their cars as they tried to outrun the twisters. That same storm system could produce dangerous storms in the Northeast today. NASCAR drivers taking on the Monster Mile at Dover International Speedway this afternoon in the FedEx 400.
Matt Kenseth looks forward every year to the challenge of racing at Dover because
it's one of those tracks you really have to attack.
And Jeff Gordon says you need to respect the challenges the Monster Mile brings. Gordon is currently 15th in the point standings. Kenseth is in third place.
Fox Radio's Marjay Tashina. Fox News. We report, you decide.
Here's the official News Talk 1090 WKBZ forecast. Today, partly cloudy and windy with a slight chance of a rain shower. High of 58. Those northwest winds 20 to 30 miles an hour. Mainly clear tonight. A low of 43. Northwest winds 10 to 20. Back to mostly sunny tomorrow. High of 64. Southwest winds 10 to 15. And partly cloudy on Tuesday with a high of 68 for Wednesday. Isolated thunderstorms are possible at a high of 68. Keeping you informed. News Talk 1090 WKBZ, the talk of Muskegon.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River and Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station at downtown Spring Lake.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt, and today we're on with George Moss. George is a retired educator, currently a lecturer at the University of Michigan Flint, and host of a podcast program, What's Going On. George, welcome back.
Okay, thank you again, Mike.
Hey, George, we don't have a whole bunch of time left. I was joking when we were off the air with Oscar here. I said we're going to have about 10 minutes left to save the world. So... So do me a favor. Tell me, we've kind of kicked around the problems. What do you see as the way forward, George? How do we bridge the two Americas and get America back in gear again?
It will not be a difficult and complicated problem if we, in fact, import and really apply the right solutions to it. I'm reminded, Mike, of a story about a bank robbery that took place in Paris, and the police department knew this guy was inside of this complex, but it's a very big complex. So they then took the police department and put it around another building. And when they asked them, why are you putting the police department around this building rather than where the criminal is? They said, we didn't have enough members to surround that building, so we decided to surround this building instead. My point is that if you are not going to apply the solution, because the solution is harder than the thing that you're applying, you'll never fix the problem. We are now putting that police force around the issue of racism. And racism is not the problem. Racism was defeated, by the way, in 1965, and this explains why King is in Memphis in 1968 leading a garbage workers strike. That was not a civil rights issue, it was an economic issue. But King has already done the civil rights work, and that work was done and completed in 1965 when they passed the Voting Rights Act, which gave blacks a chance in the South to defeat those who were in fact nemesis in their way that were advancing, causing a lack of advancement of their citizenship based upon the dual claims that this person has this citizenship right and the other person has another right. And we were fighting against that, and that was in fact sealed and overcome in 65. The problem is that more than 40-some-odd years later, we are still fighting the same enemy, quote-unquote, that has been defeated. Bull Connor died in 1977. He no longer exists. Wallace is gone. Barnett is not there. Forbes is gone. And we're still fighting this battle as if we're still fighting racism. The problem today is none of those things we're fighting. The problem today is, and this is something that's stated in the book written by Warren Williams called Enough, subtitle, Phony Leaders, Dead-End Movements, and a Culture of Failure. It's called Enough. We've had enough of that. If you look at when you have a two-parent family household, the income between whites and blacks dissipate. Blacks in single-family households are in poverty. Blacks that are in a two-parent household have 94% of the income that white families have. What that indicates then is that while the focus is on fighting racism, if you fight upon repairing the black family, you've solved the economic problem pretty much that exists right now in the black community. We see that in terms of the income differential between the two groups. The other thing is that we've got to understand that listening to false voices is another part of our problem in the communities, both blacks and whites. Blacks and whites are listening to these false leaders. I mention their names because I think we have to call these persons out and identify where these false leaders are and what they're saying. And leaders like these persons that are misleading the black and white communities, like Jesse Jackson, who jump in front of these mobs like they did in the Trayvon Martin case, and have nothing to say about the fratricide that's going on in these urban communities, like in Detroit, like in Chicago, where they're absent without leave. You don't even see these persons jumping in front of the fratricide taking place in these urban communities where people are dying as if they are in Afghanistan.
Right.
And you notice how quiet these leaders are. The balance has got to be another aspect of what's dealt with, because until you actually deal with the family, restoration of the family, and then deal with the violence that this deterioration of the family brings about, you cannot really expect to have investment in places where people are not safe. What you have in Detroit is a good example of that. Right down the street from where I am, I'm 60 miles from Detroit, and the reason why the problems exist in Detroit and exist where I am here in Flint is because when you have the breakdown of the family, other things then also kick in as a result of that. The violence that we see right now comes out of that. The flight of investment also is a part of that process. And until we restore the family as priority number one, you really are not going to solve many of the other problems that are, in fact, banking upon that problem being in place. And it's that repair that these false leaders do not want to see take place, because if it in fact is repaired, it then makes their jobs obsolete. They don't intend to go anywhere, by the way. They intend to stand here as impediments to the development that could take place if we had a removal of that false leadership and putting in its place those, in fact, that are saying things that are really germane to the problem that we're facing. These guys are the police officers around the building where the criminal is not, in fact, housed. Because this other problem is more difficult to solve. It's much easier to do what they're doing, and that is to, in fact, make the false accusation that racism is holding black folks back.
You know, what's amazing to me, George, is and I hesitate to use this word, but the audacity of these black leaders and by the way, white leaders that are parroting and echoing the same essential rhetoric, but the pure selfishness of standing up and leading that type of cause, because they know what it's doing and they know the negative impact it's having, but they're doing it solely to line their own pockets and provide themselves with the power that they perceive that they get out of it. But wow, what just raw, unadulterated selfishness to do that to the entire black race in America.
If they're not talking about repairing the family, then they're not serious, because that is the impediment that is stopping a lot of other things from taking place. The family has been priority number one, and what they're talking about is a problem that has already been resolved. America, as is indicated in the book called, this is a book written by Larry Elders, is called The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. And what he talks about is that America is the least racist country of all the industrialized countries in the world. America is the least racist country in the developed world. You would never know that by the rhetoric. And they keep beating this dead horse while the real problem goes unaddressed. That's why I get up every morning and I'm encouraged and I'm very optimistic, because I understand that once we import the right solution to the real problem, we begin to solve the problem. But no problem can be worked on and solved if the problem is in fact being denied.
But what's the step? What's the mechanical? Where's the switch to start working on the American family, regardless of race? Frankly, I think all families right now are in peril. But what do we do to fix it?
The first thing that's got to happen, Mike, is what we see going on now. For the first time in some 40 years, that is that the other voices are rising up and challenging what is nothing other than black orthodoxy. This idea that there are some people that are authentically black, which is written about by John McWhorter in a book by that title, Authentically Black. This idea that there is black orthodoxy, where blacks are all supposed to think the same way, carry the same water, think the same, import the same conversation. we are seeing that being challenged. We saw it with Bill Cosby. We saw it being challenged with Stacey Dash, who, in fact, came out before the 2012 election and said she was voting for Romney.
Right.
You saw how she was vilified by the left, because what the left wants to do is maintain the presence of blacks on what is nothing other than a progressive plantation. You can call it a democratic plantation if you want to, but it's really a progressive plantation where the idea is to turn your destiny over into the hands of others, that you actually seize in the moment and exercising what has worked in the past, and nothing else is going to work, and that's personal responsibility. In personal responsibility, you don't need these leaders. And that's why they fear that idea of being born in the community. But there's a challenge going on right now of what has been black orthodoxy for the last 48 years since Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech in Washington. And that is going to be challenged, and we're going to move out of the way. So the major impediment that's preventing this spark rebirth in the community, we're going to move out of the way, so we can have the kind of community we once had in the black community, which was safe, normative, nonviolent, elders respected, schools, in fact, functioning. All those things can happen once we, in fact, change the discourse that's right now in front of these communities in the urban centers. The discourse has got to change.
Tell me something. We're talking about Dr. King. What do you think of? Is it Alveda King? Am I saying her name right?
Yes.
Is she vilified a little bit?
Alveda King, they'll be very tepid with how they treat her, but she certainly is not one of the ones they want invited to dinner. When Glenn Beck had his march in Washington on 8/28/2010, Alveda King was one of the guest speakers. Across town was Al Sharpton's event. Yeah. And there was a counter march to what they were doing in the mall, where Glenn Beck had 500,000 people in that mall. I was there. And I was also at the march when King gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. I can tell you there were twice as many people up there with Glenn Beck. The problem that it had for the liberal and progressive media was that they understood the implications of that. In 63, when King gave his I Have a Dream speech, 250,000 people were there, 25,000 whites. Right. In 2010, there were 500,000 people there, and these were whites who had, in fact, gravitated toward the King dream and were embracing King's vision. They could not allow that to get out.
Wow, George, I've got to end our interview as we're running out of time. But listen, I've really enjoyed having you on, and I hope that I can get you back.
Okay, thanks for having me, Mike. I definitely appreciate it.
George Moss, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you. And for my last 30 or 60 seconds, whatever time I've got left, I get to do a little bit of self-promotion, if I might. This show is promoted often or mostly by Renegade River, which is a store in downtown Spring Lake. And Renegade River, the store, is celebrating its first anniversary this week. And so we're doing a first anniversary sale Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at the store with a whole bunch or most of the merchandise at 20% off, keeping in mind it's already priced at internet prices. So, but the bigger part of this is not just to announce a sale. It's after a year through the firearms industry. It's been a roller coaster ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of great people working there in the gun shop and in the sporting goods store in general. And as a result of this show, and at the end of the first year, I just really want to thank everybody for coming to visit me at the store and for tuning into this radio station. I don't know how many first anniversaries. I hope I'm only going to have one, but I've enjoyed it, and that's what I wanted to say is thank you very much, everybody, for being a part of it. And I will gladly look forward to talking to everyone in a week from now. But in the meantime, come by the store and take advantage. If you've never been there, it's right downtown Spring Lake, right next to the Spring Lake Police Department. And that's where you'll find me standing there waiting on you. Have a great week, everybody. I'll see you and talk to you soon.
The Talkin' Muskegon program can now be heard live every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. here on News Talk 1090. This is John Van White.
And Brian Worsham. We will focus on community events, news, weather, and sports. We'll also bring you traffic updates, weekly segments like the Movies with Ron Van Timmeren, the Biker Report, and Lumber